Hi,
My name's J.C. McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. Good Friday to you.
Yes, and a good Friday to you and a good Friday to all of you. So this is National Reentry Week.
I know. Yes.
And
yes.
so we thought we would talk about law enforcement and policing and incarceration sort of in general. But first, I have a mea culpa or my bad to sort of share with everyone.
Okay.
We talked last time we were together about the 7th District race, and I omitted one of the candidates, and that is Giselle Jacobs. And in my mind, I was thinking about the folks who were going to be on the ballot. But Gigi is, she was a write-in candidate and certainly has done great work, both through her business, shout out to Sister Soldier, Environmental Services,
Yeah.
and shout out to her just as someone who cares deeply about the community. So please charge that to my head and not my heart. As I get older, things just slip.
And after our show, she door knocked me.
Oh, did she?
She was the other one, so we had two.
Okay.
So definitely shout out to Gigi, and of course that was a mistake.
Yes, of course, not intentional at all.
Speaking of 7th District state rep race, Joshua Hall.
Yes. Shout out to Josh.
Shout out to Josh,
Yes.
friend of the Voices.
Yes.
Happy to see that he's going to be leading and can't wait to work with him and all of the representatives in the 7th District. We are new there, as we said last week.
Yep.
And so I'm looking forward to hearing about some of his initiatives that he's planning on working on. Great job, Josh.
And shout out to all the
All
folks
of the
who
candidates.
ran.
And I must say, you and I have been a part of a lot of political races, and a lot of them that have gotten nasty, could have gotten nasty. This is one of those that could have and didn't. And shout out to all the candidates who were class act on this one.
Yes.
I must say that they were very classy.
Yes,
And so
absolutely.
I like that.
Absolutely.
I did like that.
Also, shout out to Pastor A.J. Johnson and his wife Melinda on the birth of their son Prince.
Yes, this is true.
Yes.
He's a handsome little guy.
Yes,
I see
he
him
is.
on my news feed. AJ's my Facebook friend.
Yes, mine too.
He was adorable.
He is cute.
And I'm very happy.
Looks like
for
his dad.
them.
Looks like his grandpa, actually, I think.
That is true. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah.
It's always wonderful to have another life come.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So, back to sort of the National Reentry Week. Yesterday, I was down at Gateway Community College for a conversation on hiring ex-offenders, and so they had law enforcement there, and they had some businesses there talking about the value of hiring ex-offenders. But I have been wanting to talk about law enforcement generally for a few reasons. And what sort of sparked this for me was there's a book that's come out. It's called Jailing Our Own by a guy named James Foreman, who's a Black Yale law professor. And I thought it was interesting because he talked a lot about how mass incarceration came about and sort of during the course of when it first started in the 70s and then going into the 90s, how, there were a lot of folks that looked like us that were middle class that felt like the civil rights movement is going backwards because of all the crime and drugs that are going on. And so they kind of pushed for this sort of stricter approach to law enforcement. And I was surprised to read that Eric Holder, who was just recently our Attorney General, was the one who sort of launched Operation Ceasefire, which brought about stop and frisk, which brought about this mass incarceration. And he sort of acknowledged it at the time that he knew it was going to impact Black and brown folks more. But I think that when we talk about law enforcement, it tends to be very black and white.
Yeah.
And this is like a shades of gray.
Exactly. And he points out the consequences of good intentions. Right. And so you had all of these Black leaders who had good intentions, but didn't think of the consequences around policing. And everyone, right, tries to figure out like the best way to police, recognizing that you have to deal with crime and recognizing that there are officers who put their lives on the line every day to make sure that folks are safe. But then you have to also acknowledge that there are some issues systemically within the department, and how do we do policing in a way where the same people you're supposed to be policing feel safe, right? And so, and how do you convince the people from that community to think about being police officers, to then police their own communities, right? And it's a very, very difficult conversation to have. But if no other week, this is the week to have it. But before you go there, one of the things I think that that conversation is missing, that we're having, right, is that there has to be, right, when I think about Lorenzo and some of the work, shout out to Lorenzo, that Gabrielle and others are doing about closing down Rutgers Island, right? And what does that mean for like a huge win for mass incarceration, and how organizers back in our day approached the matter of policing and looking at it at CCP, the community court level, using the CCP table to get like all of these different parts of the city together in one room in this really genuine working kind of way. We had judges, prosecutors, right? Grant writers from the police department, right? It was this other approach.
It's very collaborative.
Very collaborative. And the only thing that's different now to then is that, and people will get mad, but there isn't this grassroots organizing effort that is universal, that calls for everyone to meet in this one space at this one time, quarterly, monthly, to do that. And so I think part of the problem is that too.
I mean, I know that the Hartford Police Department, shout out to Chief Foley. They do a ComStat on a regular basis. They invite the public to come and see sort of how their approach to law enforcement and dealing with the crime in our communities. But I agree with you that there also needs to be that grassroots effort, because you're right, I haven't seen that kind of approach since Lorenzo, since Rob, since and so you're definitely right about that.
I mean, you had Hope, you had Heart, you had like all of these organizations across the city, One Chain, Blue Hill Civic, right? They would all get together.
But you bring up an important point, and that's, of the list that you provided, I think one of them, Blue Hill Civic, is still around.
This is
community organizing organizations have gone away, and I think that what you see in our communities is a result of that. And I think funders, and I don't just blame the organizations themselves, I fault funders to a certain extent, because people like to invest in sprints. They don't want to invest in marathons. And funding a community organizing nonprofit is investing in a marathon. Because there's not always going to be that quick systems change, that quick just change in general that folks want to see. But I think there's some organizations now that are recognizing that. Graustein Memorial Fund is now investing in organizing. Laura McCarger, who's now heading up the Parent Family Foundation, she's investing in that. Shout out to Laura. Shout out to David Adams at Graustein. And so they're recognizing the importance of that.
It's another Laura down in Norwich. She's doing Youth Speak Out, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's called Used to Be Go. If not, I stand to be corrected. They're doing, so you see this emerge for youth
Yeah.
organizing, right?
But there needs to be
Some
grown
adults.
folks
Yeah.
organizing too.
Yeah.
You know, when you were talking, you mentioned Rikers Island, and I'm glad you talked about Lorenzo and the efforts to close that. I started watching the Khalif Browder story. If you haven't seen it, it's a series
Please watch
produced
it.
by Jay-Z on Spike TV. I will be honest and say I watched the first 2 episodes. By the 3rd episode,
You was done.
I couldn't watch it anymore.
I guess we're
and there
more
was
alike than not.
Yeah.
I couldn't watch anymore after
There
that.
was a point where he talked about, and for those of you who don't know, so Khalif Browder was a 16-year-old who got arrested for stealing somebody's backpack. Turns out he never did steal the backpack, but he was in Rikers Island for 3 years. A good portion of that time in solitary confinement. He was ultimately released and subsequently killed himself because he just, the impact of solitary confinement and just that
Yes.
experience on a 16-year-old is something that no child should ever have to deal with. So, shout out to Jay-Z for putting this together. But at one point he had, Khalif was so frustrated with still being stuck there. And keep in mind, if he had just said, okay, yes, I did it, they would have let him go. But he was like, I'm not going to say I did something that I didn't do.
Exactly.
And
that was that part of it was right. When Jay-Z started it off, he talked about him being a prophet.
That's right.
Right.
And
it was standing in his conviction to make all of us say, wow.
Yeah.
This kid took all of that because he was not going to admit to something he did not do.
That's right.
And he paid the ultimate price for standing in what was right.
And you can tell from, during the interviews, the ones that I did watch, this was a baby.
Yeah.
With a good soul.
Yeah.
And
look what happened to his mom right after.
Exactly. Exactly. It's just
mass
it was
incarceration tears apart families.
It does.
So I'm glad because I can tell Lorenzo from my news feed has gotten his organizer swagger back.
Yes.
And
yes.
I'm looking forward to taking that journey with him because
Yeah.
I'm feeling that urge.
Yeah.
Every now and then what happens is there's this wave for organizers where you feel this sense of agency to correct a wrong on a social issue that you've been working for many, many years, but you find this small window to push the issue just a little further.
Yeah.
I think that's what Lorenzo's feeling because I feel a little of that, specifically on a local level for me. In the district in which we're in now,
Sure.
especially around the housing issue. I've been talking to you about that, fixated lately on that.
Yep.
And I see Lorenzo going much broader. So I think there's this moment now where you see organizers itching to figure some stuff out.
So let's hold that thought. And
Okay.
We'll take a break and then we'll come back and dig deeper.
Yes.
All right.
I started skipping school at the age of 7. My mom didn't realize until she actually went to go pick up my notes. And she realized I was getting left back. After that, I started hanging out with the wrong crew. I ended up in jail 3 times. Parents, what I'm trying to say is keep on top of your kids. Make sure you call, make sure you do what you gotta do. Parents, school is important. It's a big deal.
And we're back.
And we're back.
So we were talking about the organizing piece. We talked about Khalif and Rikers, and I also wanted to just kind of talk about just sort of community policing, which we touched on. You know, there's a blog that is local to Hartford. You know, shout out to Kevin Brookman. He gets a lot of information that seems to come to him first prior to our mainstream media. But a lot of it has to do with public safety in our communities. And, you know, I've tried not to read comments on news articles, anything else, because people are just horrible. And when you have the safety of, you know, you can be behind a keyboard. I call them keyboard terrorists. They feel like they can say and do whatever they want.
Yeah.
But some of the comments that I have read in response to some of those posts are, and you know that it is in law enforcement based on the implications that they make. And what concerns me is it is so clear, and this is certainly not a blanket statement because I know not all law enforcement feels this way, but some of these officers clearly have such disdain for our communities and for the communities that they're supposed to protect and serve. And I just find that really, really troubling. I mean, I guess my question is, if you can be a police officer anywhere you want to, why are you a police officer in an urban area when you clearly just have such horrible, I mean, the things that they say, it's like, you know, I get the impression that they would be just fine if they just dropped a bomb on Hartford and just like.
And I wonder too, because I have a lot of officers that I grew up with who are friends. Robert.
Yeah.
He's a lieutenant?
Yeah, I thought he was a
Ford.
Yeah, lieutenant now.
He was always like really smart too. He was the smart kid in school. Yeah, and he was cute.
Shout out to Lieutenant Ford.
Yeah. And so it must be difficult for them as well, right? Because I know that he loves Hartford.
Yeah.
I know what we struggled through growing up in Charter Oak. I know his story like he knows mine, right? And so I find it difficult too, right? When we have these situations where, you know, police officers may have these bad statements about the people that they serve.
Yeah.
And having Robert have to be a part of that space.
Right, because you have to be blue first.
Yeah,
right?
like what does that mean and how challenging it is, right? To take on a culture that may not even represent your views.
Right. And again, you know, and I've worked with, you know, I was a grants manager at Hartford Police Department working with Lieutenant McCauley, Sergeant Matt Isley. I mean, there are a number of officers who just, and I know how much they care, and I know that's not how they feel. So again, this isn't a blanket statement.
Well, I'll share, like we were volunteering one time for fire community emergency response team, and there was a young lady there, and she had her pants hanging down, and I organized the whole Gillette Street, so I had her standing at the corner waiting for some seniors to guide them where they were supposed to be in our safe space. And two officers pulled up, and he commented on, like, well, why is your pants down? And he went all in his rage, forgetting that she was actually there
Trying
to
to help.
assist them, right? So I called Foley, and Foley handled it. Like, what do you mean? You know, like totally handled it.
Yeah.
But the idea that here's these people about to be burnt out in crisis, you got this woman at the corner helping out, and the only thing he could focus on was, aren't you a girl? Pull your pants up. Right?
So those are the kinds of things that don't help. And then when they talk about when crimes get committed in our communities, and we need the community to talk to us and engage with us, why in the world would they, when you are making them feel like you don't respect them? You know, and so there's this whole trust that has to be built. And, you know, again, I think that there are, you know, I'd spent some time working with middle school age kids, and as part of, at that time, Sergeant Malik Merritt, shout out to Malik, he had something called the Neighborhood Enforcement and Stabilization Team. And it was police officers, but it was also representatives from social service providers. So the Village was involved, and Urban League was involved, and I was at the city at the time, so I was involved in that capacity and with Health and Human Services, and it was all about improving those relationships with young people and the police.
And
But-
Eli, shout out to Eli Mercado and the Faith-Based Initiative.
Oh, yes.
Because I think that's what they're seeking out to do.
Yep.
And I think they're doing a good job within the parameters in which they're working on. But it goes back to, right, the CCP model, right? Where it's missing, right? Something gets lost because everyone's doing their own thing because they're doing it, right? I think Eli and them are doing a great job and trying to figure out how to bring the two worlds together, the police department. Rovella has done like a really good job of trying to figure out community policing in this way that's kind of inclusive, that's you know, more inclusive than some in the past, right? So you get the Mothers United Against Violence, who has been at the forefront of these issues. And
shout out to Henrietta Beckman, shout out to Reverend Brown.
Yes, right. And so it's how do you get the homeowner thinking that that's the table they're supposed to be at, right? And that was what the uniqueness of CCP. Miss Temple Shannon and them had to concern themselves in this direct way about crime, right? But they understood that they were taxpayers, and that they had a stake in making sure the crime in the city of Hartford stayed down because it would impact their tax value, right? And so how do we get that thought process from that time to build on with Eli and, you know, Faith Congregation and all of those folks are trying to do?
Absolutely. And I think that there is a way to do it. You know, maybe at some other episode we will talk about the lack of cohesion in our city and how that impacts our community in general and our youth in particular. Yeah. So there's that. What else?
Well, after you say that, then you have to like take a moment.
Yes.
To kind of like. Yeah, well, when we talk about mass incarceration, it's so many levels because, right, we talk about ex-offenders serving their time and then come out and can't get life insurance.
Yes. Or they can't get a job. You know, we went up to Osborne and got to visit. And again, you know, shout out to Commissioner Semple. I think he's very progressive. But, you know, so we go up to Osborne and they're sewing mattresses together and they're making uniforms and stuff. Which, you know, great for that they're learning time management and they're learning that skill. But when on the flip side and outside of those bars, we've got manufacturers complaining about how they cannot find the talent that they need to address all of these contracts, the Sikorsky's and Electric Boat and Pratt & Whitney and UTC. And so what I've been thinking about it for ever since that visit, why can we not, if we know that they're coming home, right? Why can we not train them on those needed positions so that they hit the block or hit the bricks ready to go into a job, as opposed to, you know, I think about one of the kids that I worked with, and, you know, he had served some time, he came out, and because there was no place else for him to go, he went back to his clique, but he knew that's not what he wanted to do, right? So he gets, so ultimately he comes to me and he's looking for a job. We get him a job sort of helping to clean up at the school, and they loved him that first day. Next morning he comes back, unbeknownst to him, like the feds had been watching his clique, so he had already been looped back in. So now he's back in jail. And I guess I use that as an example of why are we not doing a better job of making sure that they have the resources and the tools they need when they leave so that they can contribute to society, instead of having to go back to their clique, because that's where they're going to get some clothes and that's where they're going to get, you know, a meal. Because in a lot of cases, some of these young people, or some of these men and women, in some cases, that's all they have was that crew that they came up with.
And for me, like the whole trip of seeing them like sew these uniforms and these mattresses, it was like Now we know we ain't giving them no jobs to do this outside of this jail.
It's 2%
So it's
of the business in the
labor.
state. Yeah.
It is cheap labor.
And it's
Then
not
why-
a transferable skill.
It's
That's
so
the problem.
non-transferable.
I mean,
right?
the time management is, the self-discipline is, but again, if we know we need manufacturing folks, if we know we need drivers, if we know we need all these other emerging sectors, why can we not prepare them for that? Because then you're killing two birds with one stone.
Because
right?
they don't want to. It is cheap labor.
It is cheap labor.
Right? It was interesting seeing these grown men sit there and sew up a storm, right? Knowing that you won't create that space for them anywhere else.
Right.
So why would you do it?
Right.
Because it's cheap labor,
Yeah.
right? And that is, like, we have to say it out loud, right?
Yeah.
Because we continue to ask ourselves these questions when we know the answer.
Right.
Right?
And I know that there are going to be some folks who say, well, you know, if they committed the crime, it's not supposed to be about benefiting them. But I go back to the fact that it's called the Department of Correction.
Yeah.
Not the Department of Punishment, not the Department of, like, your
I
life
would like
is
to
over.
see the list of-
Department of Correction.
Right, you know how on the news sometime they show who's supporting what behind the scene. Let's see the list of everyone who's getting their mattresses there, and ask them, would they hire those same people
Right.
outside
Well,
of the
again,
prison?
that goes back to my point.
Because they're
you know,
working
it's-
for you now.
Right, but the problem is, again, the textile industry is 2% of the businesses in the state.
That's right. So
So,
there's
you
that.
know, where will they go after that? You know, there's just not a whole lot of.
And this is why I like our strategy about investing on the front end of education.
Yep,
You have to.
absolutely.
And
absolutely.
if you don't, this is we're gonna.
This is the end result. So we're going to take another break,
Yep.
and then we'll be back.
All right.
Okay.
My name is Jay Stan McCauley, and I do business as Light Source Productions. I provide professional services in the area of strategic video communications. First, what we do is we help you craft your message using what I call the rule of the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. We do event documentation, content acquisition, full-scale productions, editing, and of course distribution through our social media television network. And with social media, video is more important now than it has ever been. Whether you're talking big business, small business, nonprofit, church, or just an individual. Let's say you plan you're planning an event, a wedding, whatever the case may be. But let's say a big event, but no video. And you spent all this time, all these hours to put this event on, and maybe 100, 200 people attend the event. But more important than that is that thousands could attend by watching it on social media. But of course, you don't think about this until after the event is over. You can't afford not to capture it for social media. And despite what people think, I am affordable. Give me a call. Let's plan your next video project and share it with the world on my social media television network. I promise you that you will have the attention of one person, me.
Yo, I started skipping school at a young age. I started skipping because I had fun running around stealing cars, running the streets with the gangs, running around with my friends, doing things I ain't supposed to be doing. If my grandmother would have found out, man, that would have been it for me. But instead, I went back to school. I stayed successful. So at the end of the day, keep your kids in school. It's a big deal.
Okay. So just before we went to break, we started talking about education and the impact that it's had on mass incarceration. And I think, people love to have these conversations in silos. And so there's the criminal justice piece, and then there's the employment piece, and then there's the education piece. But it's all
Intertwined.
building together, and being at CBIA and I've had these conversations with some of them. There was a time when some folks didn't care that there was this achievement gap. They didn't care that what was happening in our urban centers in terms of education was not honoring and delivering on the promise of quality education to those children, because they didn't have to worry about it, right? So now you've got, again, this huge need for future talent, and what they're finding is that their kids and their grandkids, not only do they not want to do what they're doing, they don't want to stay here.
Yeah.
But guess who is staying?
Yep.
The folks in the hood.
That's right.
So now it's sort of this like imperative where people feel like, oh, we have to make sure that, that these folks have the skills.
Workforce.
Oh, there's like
Sure.
this.
Yeah.
Folks are like descending on these communities, and I'll take it. I'm glad, because now they're paying the attention. But it is sort of like this chickens coming home to roost in some ways, right? Because they let the education not be adequate for so long, and so now they've got this talent and skills gap that has to be addressed.
And so that means we have to address it from a curricular perspective as well.
Yeah. From a curriculum, I mean, I think schools are just kind of getting around to, some schools, I don't want to say all, but the importance of having industry involved in the school to speak to. I talk about this statistic a lot because I think it's so powerful. Gallup does polls all the time, and so they poll workplaces and they poll education institutions, and 99% of academic officers feel like they are preparing their students for the world of work. Only 11% of employers feel the same way.
Really?
Yes. So there's like this huge gap, this huge chasm between what academia thinks employers want and what employers actually want. And that's why it's important to have employers part of the conversation.
Yeah.
I think sometimes, educators come up with these ideas and say, oh, this is going to be great for filling that talent pipeline. And the employer's like, I don't need that. I didn't ask for that. You didn't ask me what I needed, actually. So there are lots of, there's something called the P-TECH model. They do a great job of industry involvement. Obviously, we have our Academy of Engineering and Green Technology, but their High School Inc. is another NAF Academy, Pathways to Technology. So shout out to all of those schools that are strengthening that connection between school and work, because ultimately that's the goal, right?
And why we wanted to give Rawson some
Yes.
for their STEM.
Yeah.
They're doing their STEM
The STEM initiative
STEM
through the
initiative
Lighthouse.
over at
Yeah.
because I feel like, right, and I've been like, what people may not realize is I've been most recently inspired by parent leaders.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's the young lady Natalie, sister Natalie at MLK.
Yep.
There's another sister at Milner, the principal at Rawson.
Yep.
I've been inspired by some sisters leading in education,
Yeah.
whether it be from an administrative perspective or
Just as a parent. As a
right?
parent,
And
yeah.
and every time I meet one-on-one with some of the ladies from Hartford Parent University, I've known them for a long time. I've trained them. I can see their development in certain areas, and that inspires me
Sure.
to kind of invest in what they're doing.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it's interesting to me because there's always this like, every time they talk about kids and why kids are not doing well, it's always, oh well, it's the parents.
Yeah.
I've never been one to sort of like buy into that. I think it's an excuse. Sure, parental involvement matters. My mother worked 3 jobs.
Yeah.
And she didn't have time to come to the
Yes.
school. But I think I turned out okay.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an easy way to sort of, rather than, again, instead of sort of talking about these things in silos, looking at all the pieces and all of the factors that are contributing to
Well, that goes,
students.
remember when we talked about young Keon and how there was all of these services and all of these disconnects
Yeah.
because everyone was working on Keon in their own little manila folder and, and not coming back.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's an example of
Yeah.
that. Right.
And there's
it's-
so many young people.
Yeah. And that's how we create the pipeline from schools
to prison
prisons.
pipeline.
Yeah.
Yep.
by being so disconnected.
Right.
Right. And so
Not to mention, expelling and suspending our
well,
children.
there's
which is
that
a-
too.
so, yeah.
There's all of those ills that plague our
Yes.
our
Yes.
education.
And
our
I'm,
community.
I'm sorry for whoever doesn't like it, but I can't think of anything that a 5-year-old does that warrants being suspended.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, I don't understand.
Especially when, if that becomes the course correction over and over and over again. Like some of the kids I worked with, like they knew to get, they knew to act up in school so that they could get suspended
Yeah.
because they didn't want to be there. And it's just like,
And I've seen situations because I've been looking at education in different systems and was
Yeah.
looking specifically after the report, special education, and how that works with policing, right? A kid who's autistic, and one of the things he can't be is touched, and he freaks out, and
Right.
yet because he's having a moment,
they
and
want to
we-
put their hands on them.
and then he's getting arrested, but
Right.
he's
So
autistic.
crazy.
So why
Yeah.
are we? I can't figure out how do people not see that may be a problem.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an easy way out.
Yeah.
I worked with an 8th grader, and he had a gun, but he didn't bring it to school. But he had told one of his other students that he had gotten this gun, and he actually found the gun. I think it might have been his grandfather's gun, and he wanted to sell it because he didn't have any money.
Yeah.
Because his family is poor. So, not that that's an excuse, but anyway, so he tells a fellow student, student tells the principal, long story short, they ended up expelling him. So for a year, and so he's supposed to be going to this alternative
Oh, I know this
setting.
kid.
And spends 3 hours at a location
yeah.
away from the school, an hour just kind of like playing around, an hour on the computer, and then they give them one worksheet a day. So what you're essentially doing is you are further setting a child back instead of looking at what were the reasons for the circumstances that led to this in the first place and trying to figure out how to support that child. Because, you essentially, and then after having him spend that year, they actually let him graduate and go into high school.
I know.
With clearly not and that's a whole other conversation that we should talk about, is like the amount of money that our children have to use in their financial aid just to take remedial courses because they didn't get what they needed when they graduated high school.
I know. You see it at Capital Community
Yeah, you see it at
College.
all of the colleges. Like they spend, and you get your Pell Grant, but then you burn through your Pell Grant on remedial courses, and then they wonder
that you
why.
should have gone in high school.
Yeah, they should have been, and and that's, I don't know if it's social promotion. I don't know what well, I think it is social promotion actually.
Yeah.
Because you get graded on your graduation rate. But stop talking about how great your graduation rate is if kids are graduating not able to go to college, not able to, in some cases, read.
And it's a national problem.
It is. It is. It absolutely is. So
It's
I
a
don't know.
national problem.
But all of these things, I think, contribute to the imprisoning and the incarceration disproportionately of communities of color.
And this is why I thought it was really brilliant of Senator Coleman at the time and State Representative Matt Ritter to start thinking about second chances. Now, and the work had been going on, but having them kind of like pushing it up there at the LOB, Gary, down in New Haven, State Representative Gary Winfield. Because you have to have folks who are our policy makers advocating and pushing and becoming a champion of one bit of a piece of it at a time. Because there's so many levels. You got companies, businesses making money off of the phone calls, off of the mattresses, off of the uniforms. Like, you know what I mean? So this is big business.
It is big business.
So you're going to need courageous lawmakers.
who are willing to sort of buck against
That's
the
right.
for-profit side of things. So we're just about done.
We're just about done.
We are just about done.
Well, I
That went
want to
fast.
make one last announcement.
Yes.
Well, shout out to Rawson. They
Shout out to
raised
Rawson.
a whole lot of money. for
$25,000. Thank you to
25
Comcast, and
Yes.
shout out to Sherry Cousin in particular for
Yes.
coordinating more than 400 volunteers to sort of make that day amazing.
Yes, it was a fun day.
It was.
Cold day,
Yes.
but fun day.
Cold and wet, but
And,
fun and worth it.
Yes, shout out to the Voices
Yes.
for
And
being
shout
a
out to the
part of
Voices for being there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And shout out to you,
Shout out to you.
because I love you.
I love you too. Stay tuned too, because
Yes.
we dropped off money to Rawson, and our
We got
next
money for
stop
Milner.
will be MLK
Yes.
and then Milner.
And Milner.
All right.
Thanks so much for joining us. Hope to see you soon.
All right.
Bye.
I am ready.